When you're getting into the dart frog hobby, sooner or later there will come a time when you have to decide what species you want to get. This is often a difficult decision, especially when you come to realize that there are no ugly dart frogs and you would really like to have every single one of them. It can be hard to navigate this plethora of species, and they all have their individual pros and cons. Today I will walk you through most of the dart frogs that are considered beginner friendly, give you a basic introduction to each species, and talk about their respective pros and cons and the notable attributes that set them apart from each other. If you want to grab a pen and paper and write down pluses and minuses for each species, feel free to do so, otherwise just sit back and enjoy this video. First and foremost, I think it's worth talking about what makes a dart frog beginner friendly and what you have to think about when you're choosing one. If you're only here to see different frogs, you can skip to this timestamp, but I think this is worth considering first. I think the most important characteristic of a good beginner frog is that they are somewhat hardy. Of course, I'm not saying that every beginner is taking horrible care of their first dart frogs or anything, but it's good to have a somewhat forgiving species since some beginner mistakes are bound to happen. A very famous quote in the Swedish dart frog community is that experience is directly correlated to the number of frogs you have lost. For this reason, you also want to start with something that's cheap and readily available. A friendly piece of advice is that you definitely won't regret going for a somewhat bold species. Especially for a first dart frog, it's both more fun and significantly less stressful for you. Some species can be very shy, and you can sometimes go for months without seeing a certain frog, which can be a very stressful experience for a beginner. Don't get me wrong, I still love my more shy frog species, and at this point I don't really worry if I don't see one of my frogs for a while. Most species also get bolder over time as they get used to you and to the vivarium, but starting with one of the bolder species is definitely not a bad idea. There is a difference between caring for larger and smaller species. The bigger ones usually have the edge over smaller frogs when it comes to hardiness and general ease of care, but the larger ones require quite a bit of food. You should not underestimate the convenience in the fact that smaller species can live in slightly smaller vivariums, and especially the fact that you don't need to culture as much food for them. I would much rather culture fruit flies for 50 thumbnail frogs than for 50 large Dendrobates tinctorius. I also recommend looking at species which are somewhat easy to breed. Not only is breeding and raising a few froglets a fun experience once you get there, but frogs that are easy to breed are much more widely available in the hobby and usually more on the cheap side. Many dart frogs do very well in groups of their own species, but there are also some species that are very territorial against same-sexed individuals once they mature, almost regardless of the vivarium size. These species are best kept in pairs once they reach their adult size. This doesn't really make them more or less beginner friendly in my opinion, but if you want to keep a group of frogs in your vivarium, it's obviously good to know which species typically do well in groups and which ones don't. You should also consider the loudness of the species you're planning to get. Some frogs are very loud, while others have a call that's barely audible, and which audio level you prefer is completely subjective. I personally love the loud frogs, but I certainly see why some people don't. Luckily, they are diurnal and mainly call during the day, so you don't have to worry about being kept awake at night. Finally, the most important thing is that you choose a frog that you're interested in. Even though I might say that a certain species is the easiest of them all, you definitely shouldn't go for that one if you don't find it particularly interesting. These animals can live for 10 to 20 years, and they deserve to live a good life for that whole period, so you shouldn't just get some kind of practice species that you're not really interested in just because it was marked as the best beginner frog, since this might kill your interest. In that case, it's probably better to do some extra research and pick a species you're more interested in. That's not to say that you should start out with a $500 frog that's super rare in the hobby, but maybe you don't have to start with the number one beginner frog either. With all of that out of the way, it's time to look at some frogs. I will take one genus at a time and try to group similar species together. I own many of these species, or at least some closely related one, But to be clear, I have put an asterisk next to the name of all the species that I don't personally own, and you should obviously take anything I say about those species with a grain of salt. The purpose of this video isn't to be a complete care guide for every species, but rather to give you an overview of what you have to choose from and help you narrow down your choice. Many of these species occur in several different varieties, so-called localities, which come from different regions in the wild. Thus, they are not morphs selectively bred by us, like ball python morphs, but rather different naturally occurring varieties from geographically separated populations. Different localities of the same species can look vastly different, but aside from the coloration, there are usually no major differences between them. To properly represent each species and showcase as many localities as possible, I reached out to the community for help, and I want to thank everyone who contributed with photos of your frogs. I have credited some of the contributors with their name or Instagram handle in the top right corner of the screen, while others wanted to remain anonymous. The Dendrobates genus is by far the most common genus in the hobby, and these are also the most commonly recommended dart frogs to beginners. There are 4 species in the hobby, all of which make great beginner frogs, and there's nothing to complain about in terms of hardiness and ease of care. They are also generally easy to breed, even though there might be some locales of some species that could be slightly less prolific than others, and a few of them might need a dry and wet season to be triggered to start breeding. While the frogs from the Dendrobates genus in general are great beginner frogs, there are some key attributes that set them apart, so we will go through one species at a time. If you ask for recommendations for a good first dart frog species, the most common reply that you get will probably be Dendrobates leucomelas. This is a classic dart frog in the hobby, and it's difficult to find a dart frog collector who doesn't have them. Out of all the Dendrobates species, this is the only one with a loud call, which I personally find very pleasant. They generally do well in groups in large enough vivariums, even though females might eat each other's eggs. Dendrobates are usually fairly bold, and this seems to be especially true with the standard ones. They aren't always as ridiculously unafraid as some other species you will see later in the video, but you should still be able to see them out and about fairly often. It seems like the risk of getting shy frogs is slightly higher if you go for some of the other localities, such as banded or aurotaenia, but they usually get bolder over time. All of the Dendrobates species are mainly terrestrial, but they will still climb a bit if they are given the opportunity. Perhaps leucomelas will climb slightly more than the others in the genus, but I would still prioritize the width of the enclosure over the height if I had to choose. Basically all of the frogs in this video are primarily terrestrial, so I'm not going to repeat myself and say that out loud for every single one, just read the bullet points. Next up, we have one of the most visually variable dart frog species out there, Dendrobates tinctorius. This is an extremely bold and unafraid species, which is an awesome attribute for a beginner frog, and it's not uncommon that they will stay in place even if you literally open the vivarium and wave your hands next to them. Their call is barely audible unless you're actively listening for it, so if you don't want a loud frog, it's a great option. The only drawback with this species is that they are very territorial once they mature, especially among females. For this reason, they are best kept in pairs as adults, or possibly in trios of 2 males and 1 female. As juveniles, group keeping is no issue, but once they grow up, you must be prepared to split them up once the females start wrestling with each other. If you want to get some tinctorius, but you can't find a sexed pair available, it's common to buy 3 to 5 juveniles, raise them up until they are large enough to determine their genders, and then split them up into a pair or 2 and sell or trade any extras. Another highly variable Dendrobates species is Dendrobates auratus. This is the first frog in the video that I don't personally have in my collection, but the things I will say about them are widely agreed upon in the hobby. In general, Dendrobates auratus is similar to leucomelas in terms of their size and behavior. Just like the leucomelas, they generally do well in groups if they are provided with enough room, and the care for these species is basically the same. However, Dendrobates auratus have a much quieter call, similar to that of Dendrobates tinctorius. When it comes to Dendrobates auratus, it seems like somewhat of a gamble whether you get bold or shy frogs, so they aren't a safe card in the same way as tinctorius and to a certain extent even leucomelas usually are. Some keepers will say that their auratus are super bold, while others complain about them being very skittish and rarely visible. This mostly varies between individuals, but there seems to also be some trends of certain localities that are more or less likely to be more bold or shy. I also wanted to briefly mention Dendrobates truncatus, since they would also make great beginner frogs, even though they are far less common than the other species in the genus. As far as I know, they are very similar to Dendrobates auratus in most regards, but there aren't as many localities of different colors to choose from. It's hard to pick one dart frog species and say that it's the easiest of them all, since everybody has different experiences and priorities. However, if you were to try to crown the best beginner frog purely based on hardiness and ease of care, then I think there's a strong case to be made for Epipedobates anthonyi, which is sometimes called the guppy of the dart frog hobby. They are small, readily available, extremely prolific, and very easy to breed, as they frequently lay large clutches of eggs. Of all dart frogs, this is one of the species that works best in large groups and can be kept in fairly densely populated vivariums. This species is often kept free roaming in botanical greenhouses throughout the world, and due to their opportunistic nature and their rapid reproduction, they do better than any other poison dart frogs during those circumstances. There are two advantages with their small size, being that they require less food and slightly less room than many other species. I would argue that these are among the easiest dart frogs to breed, not only because they are very prolific and easy to get eggs from, but also because the tadpoles can be raised communally, even in small water volumes, unlike Dendrobates tadpoles, which are cannibalistic to some extent. However, due to their small size, freshly morphed froglets will need a steady supply of springtails before they can take down fruit flies. With all of that said, Epipedobates anthonyi is definitely not a species for everyone, since they have an extremely loud, high-pitched call, and their coloration isn't as vibrant as certain other species, but if you are interested in them, they will make excellent beginner frogs. I have an entire video dedicated to this species, which I will link in the description down below. While I'm at it, I can also mention Epipedobates tricolor, which is supposedly also beginner friendly, and it's similar to anthonyi, although it's not as common. Most frogs sold as Epipedobates tricolor are just mislabeled anthonyi, and if you Google Epipedobates tricolor, almost all of the images that show up are actually anthonyi. However, there are also some true tricolors on the market, such as the Cielito locality. The next genus I'm going to talk about is the Phyllobates genus. There are 5 species in the hobby, all of which are easy to care for, but there are some differences between them in terms of size and boldness. Just like Epipedobates anthonyi, frogs from the Phyllobates genus are very easy to breed, since they are very prolific and willing to lay eggs without too much trouble, and their tadpoles can be raised communally. Something that should be noted about the Phyllobates genus, and especially with the larger species, is that according to many keepers, they are supposedly extra prone to bacterial infections if they're kept on a too damp, decomposing substrate. You don't want any dart frogs living on soggy mud or in a swamp-like environment regardless, but with Phyllobates, it's good to be extra careful about adding more leaf litter in time once the old leaves start breaking down. All species in the genus have a loud call, though the volume and pitch varies a bit. In general, the larger frogs from the Phyllobates genus are eating machines and can take down slightly larger prey items than most other dart frogs, such as small crickets. The king of the genus is definitely Phyllobates terribilis, which is one of the largest dart frogs out there. Along with Dendrobates tinctorius, they belong to the extremely bold category, as they will often sit out in the open without caring about anything. After all, in the wild, these are the most poisonous out of all dart frogs, so they really don't have that much to be afraid of, but luckily they are completely harmless in captivity, just like all other dart frogs. There is also Phyllobates bicolor. As far as I know, There are no major differences between terribilis and bicolor in terms of behavior and care requirements, so I usually just group them together whenever I'm talking about pros and cons of different beginner frogs. An interesting thing about both terribilis and bicolor is that they start out black with 2 yellow stripes, but as they grow larger, the entire frog turns yellow, or sometimes orange or mint in the case of certain terribilis localities. Next up, we have the one and only Phyllobates vittatus. This is one of my absolute favorite dart frog species, and they have a special place in my heart. They have stunning orange stripes and blue bellies, and they are also very cheap and widely available. However, they aren't as bold as the previously mentioned terribilis and bicolor, and they are a little bit smaller, so if you're looking for an exciting display frog that will always be out and about, it's not the best pick. My experience is that they usually get much bolder over time, and they are easy to bribe with food, but you most likely won't see them too much for the first few months or so. Another beautiful frog is Phyllobates aurotaenia. Genetically, they belong to the same branch of the Phyllobates genus as terribilis and bicolor, but in terms of size, boldness, and their general vibe, it seems like they are more similar to Phyllobates vittatus based on what I've heard. Take this with a grain of salt though. The last species of the Phyllobates genus is Phyllobates lugubris. This isn't exactly a common choice of a first frog, but I thought I might as well include them when I had already mentioned all the other 4 species in the genus. This is the smallest Phyllobates species, and depending on where you're located, they might be hard to get your hands on. It wouldn't surprise me if they were on the shy side, due to their small size and brown coloration, but I don't have any personal experience with them. I would classify all of the previous frogs in this video as relatively easy to care for and very beginner friendly, but now we're moving on to some intermediate frogs from the Ranitomeya genus. These are significantly smaller than most of the previously mentioned frogs, but it's a really wonderful genus of frogs with colors that appear to have a metallic shine to them. They are primarily arboreal, so the height of the vivarium is generally more important than the width, but there are some species that tend to stay closer to the leaf litter on the ground as well. The loudness of their call varies a little bit, with Ranitomeya imitator, Vancellinii, Syrensis and Flavavittata having a fairly loud call, while the other species in the hobby have a more quiet buzzing sound. If you're just looking for a good frog to start with, then I would absolutely recommend any frogs from the Dendrobates, Phyllobates or Epipedobates genus over Ranitomeyas any day of the week. But if you are really interested in thumbnail frogs, you do your research well, and you have a well-established, well-planted vivarium with a stable environment ready by the time you get the frogs, then you could make it work. However, before getting a Ranitomeya species as your first dart frogs, there are several things to consider. The main reason that Ranitomeyas are usually not considered as beginner friendly is that they are a bit more sensitive to various things, due to their smaller size. It's not uncommon that a frog will lose a bit of weight and simply fade away and vanish, and I think everyone who has kept Ranitomeyas for a long time has experienced this at some point. Personally, I have lost a few individuals for seemingly unexplainable reasons, while I have never lost a single Dendrobates, Phyllobates or Epipedobates, with the exception of a few freshly morphed froglets. These strange casualties that are difficult to explain are definitely more likely to happen with Ranitomeyas than with the hardier frogs I previously mentioned in the video. Something else to consider is the risk of getting shy and skittish frogs that you don't really see too often. Some species in the genus are generally bolder than others, but with many of them it's a bit of a gamble, and people can have very different experiences with the same species. On a few occasions, I have gone more than a month without seeing a single one of my Ranitomeya syrensis. Given that I have plenty of other frogs to look at, and the fact that I am fairly confident in my husbandry by now, this is not that big of a problem, since I always know that they are most likely in there doing just fine, and they always come out again eventually when you least expect it. But if they are your first frogs, it can be very boring and anxiety inducing when this happens. In that situation, the urge is strong to tear the tank apart and look for them, which would only make them even more shy. I'm not going to cover the entire Ranitomeya genus here. There are around 16 species, 12 of which are in the hobby, so that deserves its own video. I also only keep 3 of them, one of which I definitely wouldn't recommend to beginners. However, I'm going to mention 2 species that I think stand out as slightly easier than some of the others in the genus. The Ranitomeya that I've kept for the longest is Ranitomeya variabilis. The locality that I keep, French Guiana Yellow, used to belong to Ranitomeya amazonica until 2022, so if you're wondering why I'm referring to them as amazonica in many of my older videos, this is why. Ranitomeya variabilis is generally considered to be one of the easiest thumbnails in the hobby, along with their very similar sister species Ranitomeya amazonica. They are fairly hardy for a thumbnail frog, they do really well in large groups compared to some other Ranitomeyas. When they're kept in such groups, they are often very prolific and fairly bold. It's not uncommon that I can spot all 7 of mine at once, and you can often see 3 to 5 frogs spawning together in the same film canister. Other Ranitomeyas that are often considered to be on the easier side are Ranitomeya syrensis, Vansolinii and Imitator, though it should be noted that imitators don't always work in groups. There are of course more frogs that I haven't covered in this video that could work for beginners. I felt most comfortable talking about species I keep and similar species within their genus, but I didn't want to cover any entirely new genus that I have no experience at all with, so I left out for instance Hyloxales aceriventris, Adelphobates galactonodus, and perhaps certain Ameriga species that could fit into the easy or intermediate categories. Feel free to do your own research on those. That's it for my guide to beginner poison dart frogs. Of course, this isn't supposed to be a complete care guide for every species, but I hope you've got a good grasp of your options now and that this has helped you narrow down your choice. If you want to learn more about general dart frog care, check out my playlist Dart Frog Care for Beginners, where you can find in-depth guides on how to set up a dart frog vivarium, how to breed dart frogs, my best tips for plant choices, how to culture feeder insects, and much more. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, because it's completely free and it really helps me out. Make sure to also press the notification bell so you won't miss out on any future uploads. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. If you want to see more of my animal room, check out my Instagram page at gecko_geek06.